Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I've been excited about this. Fenton said he's a little nervous, but I told him we're amongst friends. Anyone who shows up for this thing is like family. Also, I added to the mix a House of Love RuPaul cocktail, the strong kind that gets you drunk fast. So this will be really fun.
That's the tequila margarita.
It is. Hashtag ad. How are you, Fenton?
I'm good, thank you.
You guys all know Fenton Bailey, right? Legend, television, kind of firmament of all of the content we've consumed for decades and decades. I'll give a little.
Okay.
You ready?
I
So do you want a little intro? All right, some facts about Fenton Bailey. He started World of Wonder back in the 80s with his partner Randy, now professional partner. Although, always fascinating to me that in this book you get into the fact that you started as partners.
Yes.
Very interesting twist for anyone who's been in and out of relationships, romantic and professional. I want to take notes. They now sit at side-by-side desks and have this amazing harmonious relationship that has given us decades and decades of canonical TV content in a crazy range of genres. They have been responsible for hundreds of projects. The Eyes of Tammy Faye, Party Monster, with Tony Savini and Colin Coleman, $1 Million Listing. A lot of Drag Race fans don't even know that's under your thumb too. And of course, as we all know, Drag Race has been culturally transformative and now won over 20 Emmys. Is that right?
I think it's almost 30.
Sometimes in Zoom meetings, Randy, Fenton's partner, will just silently slide one of the many Emmys across the frame without any comment, because you have a lot lying around.
Well, if the meeting's not going well,
that's when the Emmys come out.
it just slides into frame.
RuPaul's Drag Race recently concluded its 15th season with a transgender winner, Sasha Colby. So that show is still breaking ground. And in addition to working in all of these genres that seem so disparate, you've also been an author all the way through, right? This is not your first book.
No, the first book I wrote was Fall from Grace, and it was about Michael Milken, the junk bond king of Wall Street in the 80s.
So this is a good jumping off point, actually, because this book is amazing whether you're a World of Wonder fan, a Drag Race fan, a TV fan, or just an observer of the culture. And it captures so many moments that are pivot points in the cultural conversation about all of our basic rights through the lens of these eclectic projects that you've worked on. So, starting with that first book and then going on through all of these different genres, different formats, I think one through line that I see reading this is you just have this incredibly astute sense of when a moment is going to be big and resonant and stand for something. And that's something I think about a lot as a journalist, right? Part of the job is picking the stories. What's going to connect? What's going to teach us something about larger systems, about ourselves? Looking back at these decades of projects, what do you think it is that sparks you to document something, to write about something, to tell the story in a scripted format about something? What's the through line?
I think they do seem to have no real connection often, but if there is a sort of DNA to everything, it's that oftentimes the subject of the story, the focus of the story, has perhaps been, we feel, misunderstood. Or, someone like Tammy Faye was kind of a international joke. Or then Britney Spears, someone who's been sort of harassed almost ever since she's been a star and sort of mocked and just wanting to tell the story that makes them sort of fully dimensional and real as opposed to these punching bags. I suppose it's that sort of, that sense of being maybe just growing up gay, you have a sense of your own outsiderness, and maybe it's a sort of spark of empathy for other people who feel outsider.
That's really an interesting connection to make, because I think that is a fundamental criterion I think about too in story selection as an investigative reporter. It's what topic hasn't gotten its dues, what has been misunderstood and maybe could call for reassessment, what topic in reopening it might strike a nerve. And you clearly have a knack for that. I mean, you go through this book, it's Tammy Faye, the Menendez brothers trial, Britney Spears, as you mentioned, Monica Lewinsky. Very few people that I speak to who are World of Wonder fans actually even recall that you did what I consider the kind of seminal, forget the choice of words, Monica Lewinsky documentary, Monica in Black and White. And the reason it's so great is you're futuristic in your posture on her. You know, it's right at a juncture where she had to pay her legal fees, so she did an HBO documentary where she had to do a town hall, and really got put through her paces by a pretty tough crowd. And the way in which you expanded that through the innovative coverage and making it all united, even though it's a lot of disparate archival footage, putting it all in black and white is such an effective stylistic device. And it positions her as a protagonist you genuinely feel for, who was mistreated terribly. And it took like 20 years for the rest of the culture to catch up to that view of her. Across these projects, I think one other through line is you have had something of a futuristic view. My take as a viewer is often that it stems from compassion, that you tend to approach these topics through that lens. But you tell me, what do you think it is in your view of these different individuals who, as you say, maybe were outsiders, maybe were due for reassessment, drove you to a take on them that has resonated over and over again with audiences? What is it that you see in that?
Right, I think like sort of peeking behind the curtains a bit, I have to say that really, me and Randy were I was incredibly lucky to meet Randy. Number one, like a couple of days after arriving in New York, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I did know I wanted to go to New York somehow. And meeting Randy was just one of those great things that happened. And then when we started World of Wonder, and this is something about the book that has sort of always stuck in my mind, is that it's sort of, I'm writing a book about other people's work. There's no making a film on your own, or even me and Randy. It takes a village people. And yeah.
I agree.
It's the truth. And so in the case particularly of Monica, wasn't me and Randy, it was Sheila Nevins at HBO, who happens to be right here, sitting in the front row. No, but Sheila, it's true. Sheila called up and said, "You've got to meet Monica. I think you could do something good here." And I remember so clearly, and this is a story I should never tell, which is that...
So tell it.
I'm going to, I'm reckless. I've had a House of Love cocktail. She said, just make sure you read her book. And I didn't read the book. So went into the meeting, Randy had read the book, sort of. And Monica said, "So you read the book, right?" I lied. I said, "Yes." And I forget what moment it was, but some question or something, Monica was like, "You didn't read the book." And even though I thought I'd completely fucked up the meeting, and maybe actually I had, but even though Monica was so gracious and
this
funny.
Is the Andrew Morton, the Monica Lewinsky book?
Yes, yes. And even though Monica was so gracious and funny about it, which was really in a very uncomfortable moment, but it was feeling that she was a great, just a great communicator, someone who could sit with ease and feel empathy with. And so two things really. I think it's these characters who are sort of get a raw deal, but also often the stories come to us, not through our own initiative, through, Sheila at HBO, for example, who brought many films to us.
Sheila's getting called out so much. Sheila, you should have sat in the back.
I love every minute.
Well, we love having you here. A lion of the documentary industry, by the way, amongst us. She loves her long career of many great jobs. I'm sad that my tenure at HBO didn't quite overlap with Sheila, but she shaped the place profoundly and in a really wonderful way I benefit from.
It sounds like I'm dead.
Yes, may she rest in peace. She's alive and kicking and with us here tonight. Tell me about what you were like as a kid, Fenton. What do you think it was in you, even in your early years, that led to this affinity for observing culture and drawing storytelling opportunities from it?
I have just always loved, I didn't know it was Cam, but I have always loved Cam. I have always loved bright and shiny things, and television has definitely, sort of three of my life-changing experiences were watching television. One was watching Batman and Robin, the TV show in the 60s.
I bet.
And I didn't know what it was, but it was something about that show, and I was like,
and that was before Joel Schumacher put nipples on.
it certainly was. And all they were doing was going bam and pow. But I guess there was a sort of homoerotic energy pulsing through the thing because these two guys put on fabulous outfits and sort of go out and be transgressive by like climbing walls and things like that. And everything was brightly colored. And England in the 60s and 70s was really grey. I mean, yes. And so I just felt that New York was calling. And then when I was 16, I watched this play. Actually, he passed away here. Naked Civil Servant, Quentin Crisp. It was a play about him, a film, and John Hurt played Quentin Crisp. And I had no idea who he was, but he was flamboyant and really sissy and had this sort of orange hair and just, this was, he was doing his thing in the Second World War, and getting beaten up all the time. And at the end of the film, he's in a park and he's about to be beaten up by a bunch of youths. And he says something like, "Do your worst. I am one of the stately homos of England." And the youths are just like, "What the fuck is this?" And they just let him go. And he swishes off to America. And I was like, right, that's what I have to do.
And you are a stately homo of England. And you did switch off to America. And what did you find in New York?
On the plane over, I'd never been to America before I came to New York to live here, or America. And the immigration form, you filled it out, and then you had to, on the back, there were a series of questions, one of which is, I have never been a Nazi, I'm not a member of the Nazi party, and then beneath that, I'm not a homosexual. And I lied. Not about the Nazi thing.
Twist.
About the gay thing. Because I couldn't really believe, I had no idea that was on the, it isn't anymore on the immigration form, but it was then. In 1982.
We've come a long way, and so have we. What was it like for this book, going through the 40 years of work that started at that point in your life? These myriad projects that are so different. Was it cathartic, kind of reliving them a bit?
No, I think it was like trying to join the dots and feeling that I read English at Oxford, and I just felt that growing up, TV was not something you did if you went to Oxford, and sort of, and then being conscious that, in a similar way, that being gay was problematic, socially seen as problematic, I guess. TV was seen as a lesser medium and not a real medium of artistic expression. And so I really just wanted to join the dots and sort of make an account for why I think TV really is important and has profoundly changed us. And one of the first documentaries we did was for Channel 4 in the UK called Videos, Vigilantes and Voyeurism. It's another Sheila story, I mean, it's good. And it was basically all the camcorder, this was the moment of Rodney King. And in that moment, I believe it was a seismic change. Because that tape of the police beating Rodney King, I don't think we'd really seen police violence on that scale or that nakedly. And so out of that, we were inspired to make a film about all other examples of camcorders showing us things that had previously been hidden. And there was this sort of parallel between, not that we realized it at the time, this parallel between being queer and being visible and what camcorder people were doing and making things that were invisible visible. And the Sheila part of the story is, she saw the film, she was in London, saw the film, and called us up, and said, I want to buy this film, which was great, because Sheila was at HBO, and I'm like, oh. But we didn't believe it was really her calling, actually, when, you know, we've been trying to reach
I never called you.
So your people called. But we did go to the office. I'm sorry, I'm going to finish the story, Sheila. And you said, I've just got a few changes. And we basically remade the entire film. And then it was called Shock Video.
In-house, we called it schlock.
Schlock Video, I know, because the sequel was, Sheila was like, enough of this camcorder, video justice stuff. Sex on TV around the world. And that was Shock Video, which went on for 9-10 episodes of clips of sex as it was portrayed on TV. It was like an entertaining show, actually.
This is now the second Fenton book talk that I've been in attendance at. I'm basically a groupie at this point. And the last time I heard you talk about this book, you had this fascinating observation. This is something that you've talked about and written about before as well, that porn, in your view, is a documentary medium. Tell me about that.
Well, it is. And I don't understand why.
I also watch Pornhub for the articles.
I do believe that like OnlyFans is so great because people can now record their own sexuality, bear witness to their own sexuality, and people love to do it. And I think that that has actually almost put an end to the porn industry as we knew it. And that
We've seized control of the means of production.
we have, the technology has, yes. And what is so wrong with, like, TV is on a mission to make everything visible. And why not sex? And I don't want you to get the wrong idea, or maybe there is no wrong idea. It's just that documenting sex is no different to documenting anything, really. And video especially was sort of the first killer application of video. It was so great for porn because you didn't have to have a lot of lights, you didn't have to have a big heavy camera, you didn't have to script it, you could just go with the flow and get in there for a close-up because it was all in, a camcorder, it was in the palm of your hand. And so I think that you could argue a little bit that porn really led to reality TV.
The two do seem deeply connected, right, in terms of generational taste in how we tell stories. Like, I'm a millennial, like, highly produced porn with, like, organized lighting is quite strange to us. And I don't know what the Gen Z kids are watching, but I assume it's, like, even more gritty. I'm not going to those tabs. and like that has coincided with TV storytelling embracing some of that too.
Well, also, in old days, if you wanted to see porn, you had to go out in public to a theater, or even peep shows, but you still had to go out in public to a place. So there was a risk of being seen. And if you were watching it in a theater, you were invariably going to be not judged necessarily, but you were aware of other people around you watching what you were watching. But video in the privacy of your own home with a remote control, completely different. And as a result, several people we interviewed we did this big series, Pornography, The Secret History of Civilization. Several people said that video had really sort of created a visibility for queer sex and gay sex that normally people wouldn't be caught dead watching, but could watch privately in their own home without fear of being shamed or exposed.
It's profoundly transformed gay coming of age. I think it's also transformed straight people's relationship with queer sex, right? Because there's visibility into it. Like, most of the straight friends I have some knowledge of the mechanics of what's going on, which wasn't a part of the political discourse on sexuality even a generation ago.
And I think people say sex is sort of performative, and so the idea that the camera is there has been considered to be a negative thing or a sort of perverted thing, but actually it makes sense in a weird way that I don't quite know where I'm going with this. I feel I might be going into a troubled space.
Let's do it. Let's go. Trouble. I mean, here's the thing. This is actually not a sidebar. This is a major theme of this book. The idea of life as performance. And I think typically we default to decrying that, right? We see it as a problem. It's an obstacle to authenticity. A lot of the kind of millennial dovetailing into Gen Z discourse is prioritizing authenticity, almost fetishizing authenticity. It's this kind of therapized word that gets thrown around a lot and has almost been denuded of meaning. You make a very different kind of case. You kind of argue that the performative nature of life and the way in which that has been accelerated by or embraced in reality TV isn't necessarily a bad thing. Talk to me about that.
And it's a different thing, because instead of the one authentic self, it's about having multiple selves.
You talk about layers of self.
Right. So we used to laugh about this with the Tori and Dean show, which we didn't talk about much in the book, but at one point we were like, Tori had a reality show. She also had stories running about her in the tabloids, and then she had Tori that we knew, and there were three different aspects of the same person. And to say that one of those was real and the others were not was not true. They were all real. They were all different facets of Tori. And I think that the voice you have on Instagram is different to the voice you have on Facebook, is different to the voice you have in a YouTube video, is different to the voice you may have if you're suddenly on the news being interviewed. And certainly in the metaverse, whether it happens or not, I'm not sure. But we all have multiple different selves, and I thought this is why the Club Kids were so interesting, because they were like creating these kind of alternate personalities that were almost like cartoons and almost like avatars.
Well, and that's drag too, right?
It is drag, yes.
It's interesting to me because performance is obviously a beautiful thing, a beautiful aspect of drag, but one thing that I do find sense in that sort of newfangled therapized discourse is the idea that in the face of all of these technological presentation mediums that encourage performed versions of ourselves, finding truth is important. And I think I personally, as someone who had lived a lot of years under a kind of involuntary microscope, and then a voluntary one, at times struggle with making sure that I'm not performing, because there's so much incentive structure in place to perform all the time. There has been for so much of my life. So it's interesting to see you sort of talk about it as a neutral to good quality of this era. Do you think, though, that there's a risk of one's truth getting lost in a world where we're in a kind of hall of mirrors of performed versions of ourselves in different mediums?
Yeah, but no, because we are in the screen age. Like, people say to me, "Oh, you spend all your time on your phone," and I'm like, "No, I don't." But then every week I get this like weekly. I'm on the phone 9 hours a day.
You have to turn off you can't, yeah.
But I'm not just on the phone 9 hours a day. Then I'm on my laptop, 6 hours a day, and I'm watching TV. It's like we are in this thing, and so I believe there's no going back. And Rue says, you're born naked and the rest is drag. I think there's no truer words. We are all born naked, and everything we then put on is some kind of a statement or a fantasy or an aspiration about who we'd like to be. So we are creating different identities the moment we get out of bed.
How do you personally manage to maintain what I have felt as a colleague and friend is a very kind of truthful and unerring presentation of yourself? You seem like Fenton, the real Fenton, whether you're here at Strand or at a cocktail party or behind camera on set, which almost strikes me as being at odds with what you're talking about. Maybe I just haven't seen the performed version of you.
Well, I have done drag. Randy and I did do drag.
Not just that, you two were pop stars.
Well, there you go. That's another kind of.
Did you know about that deep cut? They were in a great, what years? Early 90s? Pop act. And it's sensational. You gotta look up the clips. You guys were good.
Right. 84 to 88.
80s.
But you know
and it
what?
does sound very 80s, actually.
We were called the Fabulous Pop Stars.
Fabulous pop stars.
But as Graham Norton pointed out, he said, no one called you that. And, but yes, that was, and actually, we did have a hit in the end. It was about 25 years later. Armand van Helden, this sort of very happening DJ, who some of you may know of, and Barbara Streisand, and he sampled our first single in its entirety and released it as a New York City beat. And Rue came to us and said, that record is a big hit in Europe. And we were like, oh, no, you must be mistaken. And then one night we were watching TV, and the Zohan movie, the Adam Sandler movie, the trailer comes on. New York City Beat is in the trailer. I went, oh my gosh.
Amazing.
So we called the lawyers. Ka-ching.
So looking back on all these projects, and having to recapitulate them for the book, what was the hardest period of the long career chronicled here?
Well, it was the pop stars. It was Daisy's here, and she can attest. And she came, and he came to all our shows very dutifully and lovingly. But some of them were really good. But I do remember being an elf before Christmas on Canal Jeans on Broadway, and people were just passing by, looking at us performing. We had a song called Hot Christmas, that was it. And we were dressed as elves in the window, and I just thought, I am 28 years old. This cannot be it.
What project?
But out of that, we were performing in Atlanta, and this extraordinary person introduced us on stage, and they came on stage and spoke for about 20 minutes, had the audience eating out of their hands, and that was RuPaul. And we were like, we don't need to do this anymore. Rue is a star and knew he was a star, and so thank goodness for the pop stars, because we might not have met Rue.
It's kind of a trope of like commencement speeches by now, but it is often the sort of challenging periods that lead to the most fruitful, productive periods. When you look back on the projects you didn't take on, is there a biggest regret, a story or a topic that you passed on, something that didn't quite come together or hasn't yet, that sticks in your craw?
Yeah, we never say no, so we'll do anything. But I do have a pet fantasy format that I've been pitching, and I will consider this as a pitch meeting. So if there are any executives here, it's called Past Life Makeovers. So we put you under hypnosis. Well, first of all, you have a problem in your life. Can't get a job, I don't know, whatever it is. Put you under hypnosis, discover your past life, and then you come around and we say, right, we're gonna take you to your past life and immerse you in that past life. You're gonna live in that past life for a week. You know, if you were like in Egypt building the pyramids, you're going to haul a big stone around, you're going to wear a loincloth, you're going to eat the food and lie. And then at the end of that experience, we come back to your food and say, well, how's your problem now? Do you have a job? Because the tagline of the show is, how do you know where you're going if you don't know where you've been?
Wow, that's that shit.
I know, it's never solved. That's strange.
Well, there's definitely a lot of ways in which that could become problematic, but I also think it could be great. One of the things that runs through all of this is you're a hell of a producer. Like you are great at nurturing really good ideas, and even in our conversations, like we've been talking. Wouldn't you love to see a talk show that we do together?
Yeah.
Right. And we've been talking about an idea. I didn't even tell you this. I mentioned it in passing to the head of a network, whose name I should redact, I guess, because we're in technically a public setting, but who was like, that is a genuinely new idea in the talk format.
Well, let's talk afterwards.
I know, we should. But this is like over and over again. You come up with things that I think would be too daring for a lot of people to take on. Where do you think that comes from in you? Is that also connected to what you were talking about with sexuality and identity and being an outsider, being an underdog?
Because I just think in the case of drag, for example, Ray and I just loved drag shows, and we would go to the Pyramid, we'd skip out film editing class at NYU and go to the Pyramid to see drag queens, and because the creativity was so incredible, and I never understood, I don't think any of us understood why drag wasn't on TV, because it's sort of big impact on the small screen.
And it's so visual and fabulous to look at.
So it feels like they're born to go together. And so I think in a way it's just our good luck that drag was for some reason considered unputtable on TV. But it's not, and I think it's also, it's universally accessible because we're all born naked and the rest is drag.
You write in the book that deep within every gay person lies a fear of rejection, like a hairline fracture that runs through our being. How did that fear of rejection either motivate or block you in your career?
I think, I should have an answer for this. I think, I can only speak for myself. I think it was a feeling that even though I never felt there was anything wrong with me, I did feel that being gay was not good. I don't know that it's self-hatred, but it was this fear or this sort of apprehension that you were just going to be on the outside, that you were just going to be, not part of everybody's life. Oh gosh, Ronan, I don't know. This is really getting intense here.
It's what I do.
Yeah. But here's the thing. I suppose years of thought it's like, there's nothing wrong with me, and there's nothing wrong with being gay. And actually, we're here, we're queer, and we have something to say, which isn't that we're special, it's that we are like everybody else, and that everybody actually, I think, feels like an outsider, and that is, we all feel like that, gay or straight.
One of the fabulous things about this book is this portrait of 80s and 90s New York emerges. There's a period that you chronicle where you're living in Alphabet City, you're reading the Village Voice. Are you nostalgic for old New York?
No, but people are. And because several of us here tonight were living that, and I'd love to hear what you have to say, but I think at the time, it wasn't so fabulous. I mean, it was kind of shitty because we had no money and the apartments were awful and I mean, it was shabby chic, but really shabby. But then in retrospect, suddenly everybody wants to know about this period, and maybe it's that for the last time, people were just together in a way, in a sort of pre-screened era almost. You know, you would just go out and there were 500 people in the East Village and you kind of knew them all. And you weren't necessarily friends, but everybody was sort of doing something, paired with, I think, the fact that AIDS was killing people relentlessly and appallingly. And funnily enough, I don't really remember that. Because I think what we all did was do stuff, just kind of do creative things like poetry or painting or just do stuff. And that was a kind of defiance, not necessarily pointedly political, but just it was just this sort of. And so in retrospect, it was a magic. It was a unique window.
If you could go back to that period of time and have a conversation with young Fenton.
You're doing a drag race thing.
Exactly. Have a TikTok. a TikTok. Tell me, what advice would you give?
I think actually it would be trust the timing of your life, I think. Because I was so, honestly, not that optimistic, desperate at times, and the great thing about trusting the timing of your life, it's not something you really do in the present tense unless you're like very zen. But in retrospect, like things go the way they're supposed to go, I suppose.
I should have brought a picture of young Fenton to really complete the drag race story.
Yes.
I want to read something else that you wrote in this book as a closing note here. The attempt to go back to an old world order of nation states, gender stereotypes, and that old chestnut of family values, a dog whistle to curtail women's rights, marriage equality, and non-binary genders, will never work. What they wish to prevent is already happening, although the struggle continues. Where do you draw that optimism from? Because that's not a sentiment that you hear all the time.
You can't turn the clock back. You just cannot go backwards. And people try, but they want to turn the clock back to this time, the simpler time, or a more wholesome time, or a time when roles were clear, but that time never existed then. It's a delusion.
But we are seeing really concerted efforts, in some cases at least incrementally successful ones, to roll back trans rights, women's rights in this country right now. We're at a very legislatively volatile moment. Why is it that you think that won't prevail? And to bring it back to the central theme of this book, what role do you think TV and these other new storytelling platforms, the media in general, would play in that?
You can't turn the clock back, and there's no question people try, and the result of that is great pain and suffering. But it has never succeeded. It has never succeeded. Hitler never succeeded. There was an unimaginable cost, but it didn't succeed. And that's why it cannot succeed, and it will not succeed. And the other thing is that we're visible now. You know, we are on TV, and I think I have been exposed to people that I never would have met any other way. I wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for TV. I wouldn't have known to come to New York. I wouldn't have figured out how to come to New York. And so you're not going to succeed. You're not gonna, unless you turn off all the TVs. It's just not going to happen. They're not going to be able to erase and render invisible once again that which is visible. You just can't unsee it. We cannot be unseen. And it's like another film we made for Studio at HBO, Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That in 1992, they tried this in the military. They said, okay, you can be gay, you just can't say you're gay. So you need to be gay but invisible. And it was a complete disaster because the whole argument for the law was that cohesion readiness, no unit cohesion. The idea that the bond between soldiers would be threatened by knowing there were gay people in their ranks. But actually, the opposite was completely true, in the sense that if someone is lying about who they are, not revealing that they're gay, they're withholding. So how can you have that fundamental trust, that you're going to trust someone with your life and vice versa, if that person is sitting on a secret?
I mean, I never served, but I did work as a civilian in Afghanistan for a while, and there were times where I was staying at the NATO ISAF base with like a bunch of Navy SEALs in a tent, and there were like group showers and stuff, and it seemed like it helped with unit cohesion. I think, a lot of people talk about the many reasons why Drag Race has resonated so deeply, the way in which it elevates the underdog, the way in which it humanizes people who have been at the fringes of the cultural conversation and celebrates them. I think the optimism you just expressed is actually another big factor. We are submerged in media coverage that is so pessimistic and so cynical, and there's a very easy incentive structure that reinforces that. Stories that talk about how terrible things are electrifying in a very immediate way, they're palpable in a very immediate way. And sometimes it's much more challenging creatively to tell a positive story, and that is a real element of your work through all of these years that you chronicle in this book. So read it also if you want to feel good.
It is the work of other people. It is the creativity of the queens. It is this queer joy which I've just been lucky enough to sort of warm my hands by and get a contact high from. But it is what they're doing, the drag queens and trans, is amazing and incredible and powerful.
Well, I'm personally grateful for that, and I think it's an important counterbalance because the easy narrative about queerness in nonfiction and fiction is so often like sad and or dead queers, and I think you're a real antidote to that. I think we have time for some questions, so I'm going to open the floor, and we're going to have mics passed around.
If you have any questions, please raise your hand. We'll get to as many people as possible. I see.
I've been strictly instructed not to call on people because it'll be a madhouse, and I won't stop.
Hi, great conversation. Can you talk about resilience? I was thinking about, I remember RuPaul had an interview show on VH1 for 2 seasons, and at the height of Supermodel, right? Whatever. And then she kind of went away a little bit somewhere, and then we get RuPaul's Drag Race. Can you just talk about resiliency? And when people say no, how do you keep coming back?
We have a friend, Trey Spiegel, who does these amazing paint by numbers things, and he has sort of slogans on a paint by numbers, and the letters stick out because he doesn't put the colours in between the letters. All which says there's a giant painting in the office that just says yes. And the reason it was actually hung in Stella McCartney's boutique, and they were throwing it out, and we grabbed it because Randy says no is the beginning of yes. And there it is. No is the beginning of yes. Yeah. And Rue also talks about stick with itness, just refusing to go away. And I think that is because oftentimes everybody else will give up, and you're just, oh well, you do it then, because the person's still around.
We have a question over here.
Hello, my name is David Stamps. I'm the office hours resident for social and culture impact at the Kennedy Center. Hi. The piece when you were talking about how the Rodney King thing, You know, when you were talking about putting it on the like for people to see it, I think the most powerful thing about that whole process was how America got to see something that was going on all the time, but it was like this digital age took it to a place. And then I think we had another moment like that with George Floyd. And can you speak to like what you said about I'm LGBT too, you know what I'm saying? And it's really about, feeling like an outlier, but at the same time, man, it's the same energy flowing through all of it, you know what I'm saying? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, the Rodney King and then George Floyd, the tragedy there is that seeing has not, there was a moment I think where we all thought, oh well, now we see it, the police will be accountable, this kind of thing will not happen anymore. And that has not actually been the outcome. But at the same time, around the same time, the future was a sort of Orwellian 1984 thing where a totalitarian government was watching everybody. And yet, along comes this show, this entertainment show called Big Brother, where people want to be seen, want to be on camera, want to be surveyed, want to perform, and reveal themselves. And I think it is terrible that cameras and visibility hasn't ended in justice, but it is fundamentally better that that the injustice is visible, and that we are all visible, and that ordinary people can go on TV and be in a show like Big Brother. You might not like Big Brother, I don't actually really like it much, but I just think what a fundamental opposite to what 1984 and Big Brother said was going to happen. It hasn't happened. And so it's sort of, that's why I feel it's sort of exciting that the doomsday future will not happen.
I have a question right here. Hello. Well done on the book. The audio version is amazing as well. I was just wondering, you've done so many wonderful things. What are you most proud of?
It's Drag Race, and honestly, I play a very small part of Drag Race. I mean, I cannot sit here and it has been an anxiety in writing the book that oh, you are Drag Race. I am not Drag Race. RuPaul is Drag Race. Everybody at World Wonder is Drag Race. No, but it is seriously a lot of people other than me. But one of the things last HBO story I promise, is Sheila called us up and said,
every story starts with this.
will you make a film about the Statue of Liberty? And I was like, no, please, no. Because the Statue of Liberty is amazing, but what can you say about it that Ken Burns hasn't? And make it worse, there was a new museum being built on the island. I was like, oh my God, we're building a museum, and But there was this book out, Elizabeth Mitchell, Torch of Liberty, and the mystery of what is the face of the statue? Because it's kind of a stentorian, severe face. And for many years they've always said, oh, it was the sculptor's mother. Elizabeth Mitchell said, no, it was his brother who died while he was young, and he really loved his brother, and that's the face. But then we were all in.
She's a drag queen. It's funny, the first time I worked with Randy and Fenton, the brief I got from the HBO execs who pitched them as collaborators was they're amazing and they do all this eclectic stuff, and remember Monica in Black and White, which I had already talked to them as a frame of reference for one of my favorite documentaries that made a virtue of a potential liability of having to do just one town hall with all archival stuff over it. And the conversation I was having with them was I had done a podcast. I'll digress briefly here because I think it's interesting in terms of illustrating your skill as a creative person. And it was just raw interview footage. And actually I had brought it to them saying let's just slap it online. I'll put a GoPro in the room and we'll put it on day and date with the audio versions of things and just put it on the app or something. And they're like, oh no, the broadcast rules means we have to like actually put it on air, and we don't really know how to do that. I said, just like make it like Whitney Cummings' podcast or something. It's just like raw footage, it's fine, you don't have to produce it. They're like, no, we only know how to do like incredibly beautiful, involved documentaries. And so a year passed, and then the documentary, the podcast had done well, and they said, we're putting it on TV. And I said, that's dumb, there's no audience for it now. Like, let's just let it go. And they were like, well, but have you seen the Statue of Liberty film? And I was like, no, actually, and I watched, and then I thought back to Monica in Black and White, and I really did think, like, wow, you know, this is a team that knows how to make something cool and new out of what others might think is nothing. And you really, by the way, did, in that case that I'm talking about, they made a TV series that was like a remix of that material that covered it in interesting ways, that got outside the room of those interviews I was doing through that coverage, and almost kind of coined a new language for what a talk show can look like. And it was a hit for them. And I would have never expected that. I had no creative credit for it. Like, that was really on you guys. And you've done that over and over again. So that's really cool.
It's drag though, isn't it? Because a drag queen makes something out of nothing.
It really is. It's taken like the dry ass raw interview footage and making it, zhuzhing it up like Bianca Del Rio.
But it was also the pandemic, because we couldn't like go out and do what everybody would normally do, what we'd all normally do. I remember we sent a camera, well, no, not camera, we sent some props to Q, who's a DP that we've worked with many years, and we said, just film these and make them look good. And like we talked on the phone a few times, and then those raw interviews were so powerful because they were so raw, to put a face to the voice of, you know, his victims, some of whom were in shadow, but still so...
This was Catch and Kill, the HBO series, which you can stream anytime.
Yeah, it's on there.
Yeah, it's a good show.
And you were a delight to work with.
Well, back at you and I, we've been doing a lot more because of the success of that, and more than that, loving working with you so much. And I'm in awe on set all the time. You know, I'm used to micromanaging a lot, and in this case, it's the opposite of that. I'm with collaborators I trust so much that I can kind of let the process unfold. And what unfolds is crazy. Like, I'm doing the journalism side and the interviews and thinking about the substance of conversations, but all around me, there's your incredible team doing really wild visual flourishes that I work with a lot of different filmmakers and in a lot of different kind of tonal modes. I do not see like balls of yarn getting hung in front of the camera to create like a gauzy effect that you don't know quite what it is, or like glasses of wine with food coloring in them to kind of create like amber weird things that are in soft focus in the background to like put the lighting through. I mean, you really, you're right, there's an element of showmanship and drag in everything you do, no matter how serious. And I think that's great, because I think that can coexist with even the most serious journalism. I think it's actually an important part of the kind of work I do to make people care and make them invested. And although those are visual flourishes that might seem non-substantive, they can actually, in the final product, really be important for not sensationalizing, not adding something that's untrue, but deepening the truth that you're conveying. I really believe that.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you.
I'm not
Do we have time for one more, a closing one?
We have one more question over there.
Hi.
No, it's not.
Oh, hey.
I'm David Crowley. I noticed you didn't mention the Maplethorpe film, which, as you know,
The Maplethorpe.
Do we want to? I think the intention was to call on.
It's okay, we'll do two more.
Why don't we take the two and then answer the vote?
Please talk about Maple.
Maplethorpe and then.
Last HBO story, I promise you.
I think we have one more. Let's do both of you and then we'll answer them together.
Do I go now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry to be a schoolmarm.
The Maplethorpe film, which I noticed that you mentioned about when I was everything up, you know, it's featured in it because of its boyish friend. That had a lot to do with acceptance of not only Robert's art and that iconic how people looked at him. I was there firsthand. Great. A lot less than this. And what do you think that did for Robert and the pornography industry, and also for you? Who gets this?
I loved doing that film, and it was for HBO, it was for Sheila, and because actually we read Just Kids, which is amazing, and then we read Patricia Morris's book, Maplethorpe, and we're like, oh my gosh. Because he was a complicated character. I never met him and I never knew him, but I felt that the drive and the ambition, which wasn't really told in his story, was actually part of the DNA of his art and was so critical to the times. It was the 80s, the New York in the 80s, I think, was different to New York in the 70s in that people started getting it together and saying, yeah, I can be Madonna. I can be independent in the East Village and become a huge pop star, or a ginormous artist like Jeff Koons, or like Robert Mapplethorpe, and turn photography, which was not recognized as an art form, and pornographic subjects, which were not recognized either, turn them both into fine art. And one of my favorite moments in the film is the opening moment where the curators are looking in the archives and they open this box and there is this fabulous picture of Robert Mapplethorpe with a whip up his ass. And they're like, oh yes, look at the line. We're not making fun of them, it's funny. But it's great because it's a fabulous, fabulous picture and it's a beautiful masterpiece. And he made many masterpieces and I just think his ambition, I know Patti Smith wasn't happy with the film and didn't like it at all. But, yes, she hated it actually. But I feel that,
anything like that.
well, right, exactly. And I feel that actually her refusal to be in it was actually a blessing because it gave us the room to tell the story that she hadn't told. And that was of a man who was driven and ambitious and gave his entire life to his work. And what an amazing, inspiring thing. And so there's a whole chapter in the book about him and Wojnarowicz, who was the sort of opposite, and Madonna, because she kind of took it over the finish line. But you have to read it.
Well, thank you, Fenton.
Thank you.
You also have given your life to the work. You've given us all a lot through that creativity, and in addition to that, I personally am really grateful to have you as a collaborator and friend, and I'm so excited to do more with you.
Ronan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming.
And I'll go on the road.